Power, wealth, fear. These are the foundations upon which the world's most infamous drug lords built their empires. From the jungles of Colombia to the barrios of Mexico and the streets of the United States, these criminal titans ruled with iron fists and bottomless pockets. But in the end, all empires fall. And for many of these drug kingpins, the final chapter was not written in blood-splattered streets, but in cold, steel prison cells. This is the story of the tragic fates of some of the world's most notorious drug lords behind bars. Number 7. Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, the Godfather in a wheelchair. Once hailed as El Padrino, the Godfather, Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, was the architect of Mexico's modern drug trade. In the shadows of the 1980s, he built the Guadalajara cartel into a criminal empire, controlling nearly every drug corridor into the United States. He lived like a king, wealthy, untouchable, and protected by powerful allies in politics, business, and law enforcement. But empires built on blood never last. Felix Gallardo's downfall began with the murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena in 1985, a crime that shocked the world and unleashed the full fury of the U.S. and Mexican governments. In 1989, the Godfather was finally arrested. His trial was a spectacle, and when the sentence came, 37 years behind bars, it marked the fall of Mexico's first true drug lord. But his story didn't end there. Over the decades, time took a heavy toll. Once sharp and commanding, Gallardo's health crumbled within prison walls. Diabetes ravaged his body. He lost hearing in one ear, vision in one eye. He underwent multiple surgeries. By the time he entered his 70s, he was blind, nearly deaf, unable to walk, and confined to a wheelchair. In rare interviews, he spoke with a soft, trembling voice, claiming he no longer had ties to the cartel world. He said he'd lost everything, his businesses, his fortune, even his family. There were no visitors, no power, just silence. In 2022, after more than 30 years behind bars, a Mexican judge allowed him to serve the remainder of his sentence under house arrest due to his failing health. No longer a threat, only a fragile shadow of his former self. Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo once believed he could bend a nation to his will. He bribed officials, silenced enemies, and built an empire of narcotics and death. But in the end, the godfather of the Mexican drug trade was reduced to a broken man, alone, forgotten, and powerless. His tragic fate serves as a chilling reminder. Even the mightiest criminals cannot escape the weight of time, justice, and regret. This is the story of Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, the king who lived in luxury and died in chains. Number 6. Carlos Lehder, from narco terror to a quiet cell. Carlos Lehder was more than just a drug trafficker. He was a visionary of chaos, a man who fused drug smuggling with radical ideology and co-founded one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history, the Medellin Cartel. In the late 1970s and early 80s, Lehder revolutionized cocaine trafficking into the United States. He bought an entire island in the Bahamas, Norman's Cay, turning it into a transshipment hub for tons of cocaine flown directly into Florida. With fast planes, high-level connections, and an obsession with power, Lehder became a multimillionaire overnight. But with wealth came delusions. He embraced neo-Nazism, idolized Adolf Hitler, and began speaking openly of using cocaine money to reshape Latin America politically. His partners in the cartel, especially Pablo Escobar, saw him as unstable and dangerous. And the U.S. government saw him as a high-priority target. In 1987, Colombian authorities arrested him and extradited him to the United States, the first Colombian drug lord to face American justice. At trial, Lehder was defiant, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 135 years in federal prison. Lehder's prison years were marked by isolation, paranoia, and betrayal. As part of a deal, he eventually agreed to testify against Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, which earned him a reduced sentence. Even so, decades passed behind bars. The once powerful cartel king faded into obscurity. For more than 30 years, Lehder lived in a cage, battling illness, surviving in some of America's harshest prisons, and watching his empire rot from afar. His name, once spoken in fear, became a forgotten echo in the drug war's long and bloody history. In 2020, after serving over 3 decades, Lehder was quietly released and sent to Germany. There were no cameras, no headlines, just a frail old man stepping into a world that had long since moved on. Carlos Lehder dreamed of building a narco-utopia. He ended up as a fugitive, a prisoner, and finally, a ghost in exile. His story is a tragedy of power corrupted by madness, a cautionary tale that even the boldest revolutionaries can be caged by their own ambition. This is the tragic fate of Carlos Lehder, the smuggler who tried to become a savior and lost everything. Number 5. Frank Lucas, Redemption Behind Bars. Frank Lucas was once the undisputed king of Harlem's heroin empire. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, he became a legend, not just for the millions he made, but for how he made them. By cutting out the middleman and smuggling heroin directly from Southeast Asia, hidden in the coffins of American soldiers, Lucas built an empire that rivaled the mafia. At the height of his power, he claimed to make $1 million a day. Dressed in custom suits, seated ringside at boxing matches, he was as much a part of New York's elite as he was its underworld. But all empires built on poison and violence eventually collapse. In 1975, Lucas was arrested by federal agents. The bust was massive. Over $500,000 in cash was seized from his home. He was charged with drug trafficking and sentenced to 70 years in prison. But then, something unexpected happened. Frank Lucas flipped. He became an informant, helping authorities indict more than 100 drug dealers and corrupt law enforcement officers. In exchange, his sentence was drastically reduced. He served just 5 years before being released into witness protection. But freedom didn't last. Lucas returned to crime and was arrested again in 1984 on new drug charges. He would spend another 7 years behind bars. By the time he was released for good, the drug game had moved on, and so had the streets that once bowed to him. In the years that followed, Lucas tried to turn his life around. He gave interviews, mentored at-risk youth, and even saw his story immortalized in the 2007 film American Gangster, where he was portrayed by Denzel Washington. But the glamour could never erase the damage. He lost much of his fortune. He lost friends, family, and his health. In his final years, he was confined to a wheelchair, quietly living out his days in New Jersey. He died in 2019 at the age of 88, no longer feared, no longer revered, just remembered. Frank Lucas once ruled Harlem with money, power, and fear. But in the end, his empire crumbled, his fortune vanished, and his legacy was stained by betrayal and regret. Number 4. Rafael Caro Quintero, From Imprisonment to Infamy Again. Rafael Caro Quintero was once a titan in the shadows, a founding member of the Guadalajara cartel, and one of the original architects of Mexico's drug empire. In the 1980s, he helped smuggle billions of dollars worth of marijuana and cocaine into the United States. Rich, powerful, and untouchable, Caro Quintero was a legend. But legends often leave blood in their wake. In 1985, U.S. DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered in Guadalajara. The brutal killing sent shockwaves through both governments. And it was Caro Quintero who was accused of orchestrating it. The United States demanded justice. Mexico delivered. He was arrested and sentenced to 40 years in prison. But prison did not end his story. It only paused it. For 28 years, Caro Quintero sat behind bars. Then, in 2013, a controversial court ruling declared his sentence improperly served. He walked out a free man. The United States was outraged. Mexico issued a new warrant, but Caro Quintero vanished into the mountains. For nearly a decade, he was a ghost, rumored to be back in the drug trade, operating in the shadows, protected by armed guards and remote hideouts. The DEA placed him on its most wanted list, offering $20 million for his capture, the highest bounty ever for a drug trafficker. In July 2022, the chase finally ended. Mexican Marines captured Caro Quintero in the rugged Sierra Madre Mountains. Now in his 70s, frail and ailing, the once mighty drug lord was placed in a maximum security prison. He now awaits extradition to the United States to face justice for Camarina's murder, nearly 40 years after the crime that defined his life. Caro Quintero, who once dreamed of building a criminal dynasty, now spends his days confined to a cell, battling health problems and staring down a lifetime behind bars, from cartel kingpin to fugitive, from freedom to a steel cage. Rafael Caro Quintero's life is a tragic spiral of power, violence, and consequences. His fate is a haunting reminder that even in the drug world, time and justice always catch up. Number 3. Griselda Blanco, the Black Widow's end, came after prison. Griselda Blanco was not just a drug trafficker, she was a pioneer of violence, power, and terror in the cocaine underworld. Known as La Madrina, the Black Widow, and the cocaine godmother, she carved her place in history as one of the most feared and ruthless figures of the drug trade. In the 1970s and 80s, she flooded the streets of Miami with Colombian cocaine, building a criminal empire that earned her millions and left hundreds dead in its wake. She orchestrated drive-by shootings, executions in broad daylight, and even ordered hits from her own home. Unlike her male counterparts, Blanco didn't just survive in a man's world, she dominated it. But eventually, the walls closed in. In 1985, she was captured by federal agents and charged with drug trafficking. She was sentenced to over a decade in prison, and her once glamorous empire began to crumble. Behind bars, the woman who had terrorized 2 nations became a prisoner of her own past. But prison didn't break her. Instead, it became her hiding place. She served nearly 20 years in U.S. custody, evading harsher sentences due to lack of evidence linking her to the hundreds of murders she was suspected of ordering. In 2004, after completing her sentence, she was deported back to Colombia. For years, Griselda Blanco disappeared from public view. No longer a queenpin, no longer feared, just a woman in exile, stripped of power, fortune, and family. It seemed she had left the drug world behind, but the past never forgets. In 2012, Blanco was shot and killed outside a butcher shop in Medellin by a motorcycle assassin, a method of execution she had once made infamous. It was a final grim twist of fate. The woman who had ordered so many deaths met her own in the exact same fashion. Griselda Blanco built her empire through blood and bullets, but in the end, the violence she unleashed came full circle. Her death was not on the front pages of history, but on the cold concrete of a Colombian street. This is the tragic fate of Griselda Blanco, the queen of cocaine, brought down not by justice, but by the very cruelty she once commanded. Number 2, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the escape artist caged for life. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, once the most powerful drug lord in the world, rose from poverty in rural Sinaloa to become the ruthless head of the infamous Sinaloa cartel. He was known for his charm, his cruelty, and his uncanny ability to escape justice. Twice he broke out of Mexico's most secure prisons, once hidden in a laundry cart, and later through an elaborate mile-long tunnel beneath his cell. For decades, El Chapo was a phantom, always one step ahead of the law and always at the center of the drug war's deadliest chapters. But in 2016, his luck finally ran out. Captured by Mexican Marines and extradited to the United States in 2017, Guzman faced trial in New York. The courtroom was a fortress, and the trial a spectacle. Testimony from former allies, wiretaps, and brutal accounts of torture and murder painted a chilling picture of a man who built an empire on fear and blood. In 2019, he was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, plus 30 years. The king of narco-trafficking was now an inmate. Today, El Chapo lives in complete isolation at ADX Florence, America's most secure prison, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. His cell is a 7 by 12-foot concrete box. No windows, no contact, no freedom. For 23 hours a day, he sits alone under constant surveillance. There is no escape here, no tunnels, no bribes. Just silence. The man who once commanded armies, moved tons of cocaine, and corrupted entire governments is now a ghost within steel walls. His family, especially his wife, Emma Coronel, faced their own legal troubles. His sons have stepped into the cartel's leadership, but El Chapo himself is a relic of another era, left to age in a cage built for the world's most dangerous. Joaquin Guzman believed he was untouchable. He built a criminal dynasty that reached every corner of the globe. But in the end, even the most powerful fall. From tunnels and thrones to concrete and chains, this is the tragic fate of El Chapo Guzman. Number 1. Pablo Escobar, the kingpin who chose death over prison. Pablo Escobar, the name alone once sent shivers across continents. At the height of his power, he controlled the Medellin cartel, moved 80% of the world's cocaine, and amassed a fortune that made him one of the richest men on earth. But with power came violence. Bombings, assassinations, and the deaths of thousands followed in his wake. By the early 1990s, under mounting pressure from both the Colombian government and the United States, Escobar made a shocking move. He agreed to surrender. But his surrender came with a catch. He would serve his time in a prison of his own design, La Catedral, a luxurious compound built into a hillside outside Medellin. It wasn't just a prison, it was a fortress. Escobar filled it with pool tables, big screen TVs, a soccer field, even a bar. Friends and prostitutes came and went freely. He ran his cartel from within its walls, untouched and untouchable. To the outside world, it was a mockery of justice. But that illusion wouldn't last. In 1992, when the Colombian government discovered Escobar was torturing and killing rivals inside La Catedral, they moved to transfer him to a real prison. That's when the inevitable happened. Escobar escaped. For the next 16 months, he was a fugitive. He moved constantly, hiding in safe houses across Medellin, protected by a loyal but shrinking network. The noose tightened. His enemies were everywhere: the DEA, the Colombian military, and a deadly vigilante group known as Los Pepes. Then, on December 2, 1993, Escobar's run came to an end. Tracked down by Colombian forces, he was shot and killed on a rooftop while trying to escape, barefoot, alone, and desperate. The man who once terrorized a nation died like a common criminal. Pablo Escobar's time in prison was not a fall. It was a pause. A game he thought he could control. But justice, like fate, can be delayed, not denied. His prison was a palace, his escape legendary. But in the end, his choices led to a lonely death and the collapse of his empire. This is the tragic fate of Pablo Escobar, the king who built his own cage and never found a way out.